Um, YouTube. Okay. Neil, I think we can go ahead and start it.
I think so too.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Good afternoon. Uh, my name is Neal Carter. I am the president and co founder of Disability Victory. With me on the training today is our other co founder, Sarah Blahovec. Um, and we are excited to bring the first training of 2026 to y'all today. The training is called Introductions to Accessible Disability Inclusive Campaigns and Organizations. Before we get started, I'll give you some housekeeping items. Today's event has live captioning on stream text. Sarah has shared the link. We'll continue to share it over the course of the meeting today, and ASL interpretation. On screen with me right now is Lisa, and Epiphany will be joining us later on during the course of the meeting. We will also be uploading the training to YouTube as well after the training is over with. And we look forward to y'all feedback. To view the caption, just click on the stream text link. Uh, if you don't see that when you click it, if you don't see the captioning, just please alert either Sarah or myself, and we will work on that. The American Sign Language interpreters will appear on screen with us today, and as I said, and I'll repeat again, we also have the stream text link where you can view the captions. And if you need help with this training,
Neil, I
please
think you're
message
you're
again
breaking up.
myself or Sarah, and we'll do this to address it. Finally, before I go into the future introduction, I'll give a brief uh, description of myself. Again, my name is Neal Carter. Uh, my pronouns are he, him, his, and I'll give you a brief image description. I'm a black man sitting in a predominantly white room with a blue striped button down shirt on, sitting in a black chair. Sarah, did you want to give your
Yes.
image description?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Blahovec. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman. I have brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. I'm wearing glasses and a blue shirt, and the room behind me is blurred. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. We will have an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the workshop. You may submit your questions or comments through the chat. Uh, if you are on the phone and want to ask a question and make a comment, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. We will be monitoring the chat and will voice any questions and comments that come through for accessibility. You can also email questions to our email inbox at hello@disabilityvictory.org. By default, you can only chat with the host and the panelists for this event. We do that so we can voice all messages, and also because it can be distracting for people using assistive technology. Again, please submit your questions or comments to, if you cannot submit them in the chat, please email them to hello@disabilityvictory.org. I'll just give
Okay.
a brief intro. But right before we get started, I just want to give a brief intro because for many of you who haven't joined, who may be new to Disability Victory, this is your first training for us, which we are excited to have you on. For many of you, this is not your first training, but for those of you who are new, if you aren't familiar with us, Disability Victory is a 501c4 organization. Our mission is to build the political power of disabled progressives through training, networking, and leadership development. We envision a country where disabled people have the information, support, and skills they need to successfully lead as candidates, elected officials, and campaign staff. You can learn more and sign up for our mailing list and updates at www.disabilityvictory.org.
Neil, yeah, there's been a little bit of issues with your audio cutting in and out at times. It might be like an internet connection thing, but just letting you know.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So with that, let's get started. I'll take this slide. So today, we want to cover who is the disability community. A lot of the first part of this presentation might be familiar to a lot of folks already on this call if you are part of the disability community. So we're going to try to go through that a little quicker while not too quick for the interpreters and captioners. Understanding, recognizing, and dismantling ableism, creating a disability inclusive culture in campaigns and organizations, the basics of legal obligations and workplace accommodations, and making field organizing accessible. I do want to note there are many parts of accessibility that we aren't covering today, like accessible communications, and how to host accessible in-person, virtual, and hybrid events. We actually have separate trainings on those, so if that's something you're interested in, please let us know as we're planning out the content for the rest of the year. Oh, we already covered that. I put the slides in the wrong order, but this is the slide about Disability Victory, so we'll go to the next slide. So, an estimated 1.3 billion people worldwide have significant disability. In the US, we know at least 1 in 4 adults have a disability, and the US legal definition is a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. We often take a very expansive view on this whenever we're talking about disability. For Disability Victory, we go based on self-identification of disability. Because we know that a lot of folks may fall through the cracks in these legal definitions. And we know that the disability community is growing. Post-viral illnesses such as long COVID is causing an increase in disability. We have an aging population. Climate change and environmental issues are causing increases in disabilities like asthma, disability from conflict. We know that genocide and war are contributing to disability, and we're also seeing it at home as ICE attacks our own communities, where people are ending up with temporary or permanent disabilities to those attacks. And we've also seen it as well with police brutality. And then the changing definition and perception of disability also means that we have, again, a more expansive view of disability. In terms of what we know about political participation of people with disabilities, just go through this really quickly. We know that in a 2020 EAC survey, 11% of disabled voters has difficulty voting. We know from a 2016 survey and from several state and local surveys that the majority of polling places still have access barriers. The GAO survey found in 2016 that over 60% of polling places that they surveyed had barriers. We know that there are barriers throughout the voting process through registration, education, and voting. Those barriers are also increasing as we're talking about reducing, in some states, reducing vote by mail. South Dakota introduced a law to try to entirely eliminate voting machines, and that includes accessible voting equipment. So there are attempts to roll back accessibility. We know that campaigns, accessible, there are inaccessible events and information from campaigns and political parties. And this is political parties on the left and the right. Um, while we are a progressive organization, and we do believe that, we want progressive political parties to be more accessible on disability. We've seen this discrimination in all major parties. Um, and it has been, and in third parties as well, and it's certainly been a challenge. Confusing language in ballot measures and voter information, often not plain language. And ableism, it ultimately comes down to ableism, discrimination, and social prejudice against disabled people.
Ableism in political organization. Unfortunately, our society still belittles disabled individuals by falsely assuming that only certain bodies and minds have value. This is ableism, a pervasive form of discrimination based on disability stereotypes and stigmas. Structural prejudices like racism and gender bias only worsen the matter. Surprisingly, political spaces often overlook ableism when tackling social injustices. The political sector must recognize that disability is indeed an essential element to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ableism is only one core barrier. The, this workshop aims to explore how ableism exists in our society and within the political organizations and share powerful anti-ableist principles and practices that the disability community leaders have developed.
So, when it comes to ableism in political spaces, we actually had an entire slide
We
of,
did.
yes, of examples that we had to delete, um, because just for time. And we get new ones weekly. Last week, I believe it was Marco Rubio who compared Senator Tammy Duckworth to, oh God, who was it? It was
I can't even
was
remember, but it was
yeah,
unfortunate.
there's some sort of ableism from Marco Rubio. Rubio, Tammy. Um so yeah, we see this weekly. We've seen discussions of who should be able to vote. Um and oh yes, it was Forrest Gump. My apologies. Which was it was an attack. It was kind of an intellectual disability slur without using the R word. Um, because we have seen on the left and the right that the R word has made a comeback, which
Yeah.
has been very disappointing. Um, okay, so. We have two examples on screen here from when the 2024 election was going on. The first one is a cartoon that from the Capitol Inc., uh, labeled Capitol Stairlift, and it shows the Senate, but it says Senate Assisted Legislating Facility with a Welcome Back Congress um, uh, banner and a stair lift going up the steps of the Senate, and nurses assisting aging legislators who are using assistive devices. And it says there were a few upgrades at the Capitol over the recess, Senator. And now, and the second example is The Economist, where there is a presidential seal on a walker and it says no way to run a country. And these are concerning because, well, for the first thing, Congress is not actually fully accessible. It would be great to have a stair lift. It would be great to make these things more accessible, where disabled people have been consistently fighting for their rights. In a building that has not even been made accessible to constituents and legislators. But these are attacks on the basis of disability versus on their connections to wealth, to having spent a long time in office, not listening to their constituents. Um, there's a lot of nuanced discussion about that can be had about um, whether or not our elected officials are connected to what we want, if they are representative of our communities that have nothing to do with mobility devices and the use of mobility devices. And we see this trickle down to how we talk about candidates for elected office. There's been attacks recently on someone running for Congress in Illinois on the basis of her having narcolepsy. And someone had argued that narcolepsy is not a real disability. We've seen discussions whenever John Fetterman was running for office. Now, I am not a John Fetterman fan. Let me get that out of the way. But there were discussions purely on the basis of should he be allowed to have cart captioning at a debate as an accommodation, and whether his use of cart captioning disqualified him from elected office versus, the policies and positions. So it's something that we see a lot of. So, what does ableism look like in politics? Neal, do you want to take this slide?
I certainly can. Uh, Ableist beliefs, that some of these we just covered, or Sarah just covered, in describing some of the more recent attacks on disabled elected officials and disabled candidates. But those include people with mental health conditions can't be trusted as elected officials. People with cognitive disabilities are incapable of not holding elected office. A disabled candidate is less electable. Uh, Needing an accommodation means a disabled person is getting an unfair advantage, or that a disabled person is less capable of doing a job. And finally, internalized ableism about yourself, and lateral ableism, disabled people being ableist towards other disabled people.
And we know that there is ableism towards political candidates, not just because we have talked to a bunch of them, but because there's starting to be some studies on this, although this is still a very under-researched field. So a 2021 study by queer politics researchers, Gabrielle Magni and Andrew Reynolds, looked at the percentage of voters less likely to support candidates with various health conditions. And they looked at a number of different conditions. So someone who's a wheelchair user, someone who's a little person, someone who has had a heart attack, someone who's overweight. And there is, I'm describing right now, um, a chart on screen that shows these listed. So blind, deaf, HIV positive, depression, cancer, and bipolar. They found that all health conditions face severe negative bias, but penalties vary substantially across conditions. So there are more stigmatized conditions, where someone who is public about having bipolar disorder, or depression, or is HIV positive, experiences more stigma from the public whenever it comes to whether voters will support them. Whereas someone who's a wheelchair user still faces some stigma, but it's to a lesser extent than some of these other conditions. And this really comes from a lack of understanding of disability, and it comes from ableism. So, what does ableism look like in political organizations, the political sphere, and campaigns? And these are all real examples that we have seen. A political party refuses to accommodate a deaf political candidate at the candidate forum. That's something that has happened to a friend of mine, where their local political party would not provide an interpreter. People who receive federal disability benefits can't run for office without the loss of those, without risking the loss of those benefits. That's something that we have explored as well. A very frustrating thing where there has been legislation put forward to try to address that, but it has not passed. Physical requirements in a job description that are not essential requirements for the job, such as must be able to lift 30 pounds for a desk job. A campaign training program being held in a physically inaccessible building. And organizations and campaigns not using alt text on images or adding captions to videos, something that we see all the time.
Far
Neal?
too often. Yep. Challenging ableism. Ableism doesn't exist in a vacuum. Examine and dismantle ableist judgment and attitudes. Incorporate disability into learning and personal development. Listen and learn from disabled people, uh, especially marginalized disabled people. Hire, support, and promote disabled talent. Hire us. It's can't be more simpler than that. Be intentional, respectful, and anti-ableist in our language, internalized and external. Incorporate accessibility in your programming and operations from planning to implementation.
And so I'm just going to go through the slide quickly. Here are some examples of some resources that you can use to learn from disabled folks. I think we have a lot of disabled folks on here, so
We
this
do.
is
We
all
do.
stuff that you're probably familiar. Black Disability Politics by Sammy Shulk, Demystifying Disability by Emily Ladau. Um, Disability Visibility by Alice Wong, who is our disabled ancestor and a good friend who recently passed. Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice, um, Against Techno Ableism, and The Future is Disabled. And then we have other resources. Crip the Vote is a campaign that has been on social media. It was particularly popular on Twitter when Twitter was not horrible for talking about disability policy issues, particularly during the 2016 and 2020 campaigns. The Rev Up campaign, they run nonpartisan disability voting coalitions in different states. They're run by the American Association of People with Disabilities. The SABE, which is Self Advocates Becoming Empowered, Go Voter Project. The Disability Visibility Project, again run by Alice Wong. And then the SINS Invalid 10 Principles of Disability Justice. And we won't get into it today. But there's a very big difference between disability rights and disability justice, and what those frameworks, how they work. Disability rights is more working within these political systems, and disability justice is more working outside of those systems. So definitely something to read up on. Okay, so
Accessibility.
yep, go
Sorry.
ahead.
Okay. Uh, and now we're going to cover some, accessibility in practice. And we have a fantastic quote from legendary uh, recording artist Stevie Wonder. We need to make every single thing accessible to every single person with a disability. And again, that was a quote from legendary recording artist Stevie Wonder.
Thanks. So, myths about accessibility. Accessibility must be expensive and time consuming. Um, Accessibility and accommodations only help a small number of people, and nobody else. It's an optional add-in that you only do if you have enough time and extra money and infrastructure to be able to care about it. You can just implement it last minute on an as-needed basis. Um, it's something that you only have to do once, and then you can just move on to something else. And it only impacts a few people, so it's not a big priority. And you'll see as we go through these slides why these are not true. Um, Accessibility is something that can be implemented on every size campaign or organization, from really bootstraps organizations that have really no funding to these really large campaigns and organizations that are bringing in millions of dollars. In fact, one thing I'll say is that my local Palestine organizing group is one of the best that I've seen on accessibility. They aren't even a formal 501c3 organization or anything like that. They just have a lot of disabled people who are involved and can implement accessibility throughout what they do. So it's something where everyone can do it. And resources may make an impact, but there's something that everyone can do to increase accessibility.
Accessibility throughout your organization. Accessibility and disability inclusion are important for both your internal and external culture and operation. This means accessibility can span your hiring processes, employee relations, your websites, social media, your emails, your online and in-person events.
Um, One thing we have to address for accessibility is just the overall campaign culture. We know that political campaigns and organizations have a history of intense, underpaid work schedules with little flexibility. And it's made it really difficult for disabled people and a lot of non-disabled people to stay in this space. And I would say it also contributes to worsening of disability or even the creation of disability in terms of impacts on mental health. This is certainly a problem in the progressive space. We know that progressive campaigns, some of them may have good funding, but we don't have the billions of dollars that are needed for campaigns up and down the ballot. And that's also because, we want to have ethical funding sources. But that makes it a challenge because there is such a pressure to put in 7 days a week campaigning, canvassing, and it can lead to a lot of burnout, especially among all of the young organizers who go into politics in maybe their late teens and 20s. So one thing that is important for a disability inclusive culture, and work culture and just a good work culture in general is um, to have flexibility, clear communication, planning, and documented procedures to ensure that your campaign is a welcoming and inclusive place. And even though you may be under these pressures, you are um, taking care of your people and fostering an inclusive environment. One thing that I will shout out is Arena Academy. They are a campaign training program mainly for political organizers, not for candidates themselves, but the folks who work on a campaign, have created a team agreement where campaign workers can set the cultural norms and internal processes, and be able to negotiate that with the leadership of the campaign. So really like seeing things like that because it makes it more accessible for everyone and hopefully more sustainable for everyone.
And I'll also add as we're shifting on that Arena is a accomplice of Disability Victory and our work, and shout out to them in their new as they've shifted leadership and we've shifted leadership. Shout out to them for their continued progress as it relates to accessibility.
So, disability inclusive culture, what do you do? Encourage your team to take breaks. And this is just some general examples, but there's a lot more you can go into here.
Right.
Understand that people need additional flexibility, whether for doctor's appointments, taking care of families and pets, or just being able to rest and offer that flexibility. Set clear standards and expectations. Check in with your team regularly to see how they're doing and if they need anything. And clearly communicate your commitment to accessibility, resources to support your team, and any policies. So, again, this goes back to just having leadership that understands that disability is something that is complex. It means something different for different people. And we'll get into what these practices look like in detail. But a lot of this involves just creating a welcoming environment where people can discuss their needs, and that you openly broadcast that you want to make your campaign inclusive and accessible.
And here are some, don'ts as far as disability inclusive culture. Do not reward or glorify overworking. Don't expect people to put off important personal matters. Don't create rigid expectations or quote professionalism that dictate what a person should look or act like. Don't deny an accommodation without working with the team member to find out a different solution that works for everyone. Don't pressure anyone to disclose their disability. And don't forget that organizing is a long game, and burning out organizers is unsustainable for the movement. We've
Yes.
seen several cases of this over the course of, I'd say, there are probably the last two presidential cycles. I would say there are a few progressive organizations, unfortunately, out there that I won't call out by name, but I will say that they, unfortunately, when it comes to burning out organizers, they do that to a T. When it comes to canvassing, unfortunately, not only are they an inaccessible organization in terms of not hiring disabled people, but then they take it a step further and burn out their folks on the ground.
Yes. Yes. So, Neil, I love this slide.
Yeah, I love this slide too. So this is one of my favorite slides, and Sarah's well. What does my campaign staff look like? Obviously, so there are two images here. One is an image from a movie called Trading Places, where there's four young men singing a song in a I believe it's a tennis club. And then there's another picture to the left of that, or to the right, depending on where your screen is, where it looks like a group of it's a staged image for a college campus of of forced of what some in the non-progressive space would probably call forced quote unquote inclusion. They would probably categorize this image as DEIA, right? And let's just be clear: these are just folks of varying marginalized communities, you know, in a picture. Uh, it's really nothing more than that. When we're talking about campaign staff, obviously, most campaign staff organizationally look like and have unfortunately looked like the picture on the left, and we need more campaigns to look like the picture on the right.
So, understanding accommodations. Accommodations are adjustments to a program, activity, event, or job that make it possible for a disabled person to participate equally. There are legal requirements for places of public accommodation, including nonprofit and political organizations, to not discriminate against people with disabilities and be accessible. Employers must provide reasonable accommodations to an applicant or employee with disability, and accommodations are critically important for providing full access and inclusion to disabled people. I think that because campaigns are temporary structures, a lot of times this is forgotten. A lot of times um, their legal obligations are kind of brushed aside or
Mhm.
seen as not important because a campaign is a temporary thing. But they still have to follow the law. Um, yeah. So,
And here are some great ways you can advocate for yourself and provide request accommodations. Uh, when should you offer accommodations in hiring and employment? Uh, Information sessions and webinars like the one we're in right now. Application processes, events, fundraising, networking opportunities, and conferences. And then obviously both in-person and online programming. So you can offer them in both. And while organizations are not required by law to provide workplace accommodations to volunteers, it is best practice to do so. And I'll just add that we've seen far too often, frankly, that uh, as Sarah indicated in the last slide, that campaigns, even though they're temporary, campaigns and political organizations alike wait to address accessibility at the last minute, which shouldn't be the case. Accommodations and accessibility should be first on the list, not last. That's first. And then second, when we are talking about accommodations of any kind benefit everyone, not just disabled people. Let me repeat that
yes.
again. Accommodations benefit everyone, not just disabled people.
So The Americans with Disabilities Act, while we still have it,
Right.
which is it's really bleak. So the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. And just for full disclosure, we're not employment lawyers. We're just sharing information here. So Title I of the ADA applies to employers with 15 or more employees. Employers who have below that should still follow the law as much as possible. They may experience some more significant challenges in terms of funding for certain accommodations, but still, as we said before, there are many things that can be done that do not require any sort of funding. They just may require rearrangement. So the ADA protects qualified individuals from employment discrimination, and that includes someone with a disability, which, as we said before, is someone with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. But it also covers someone who has a record of having a disability and someone who is perceived as having a disability. Employers may not retaliate against an applicant or employee for asserting their rights under the ADA, and they may not discriminate against an applicant because of their relationship or association with an individual with a disability. Unfortunately, as we know, what is required by the law often doesn't happen in practice. We know that people get away with discrimination just by not calling it that. They'll do something like say, well, we had someone who's a more qualified applicant where apply to a job where maybe disability is something that went into their reasoning on why they rejected someone, but they don't have to really document that. So it's something where we still see those barriers in practice. And we also see them in ways that job descriptions are written. One of them that journalist David Perry covered several years ago was the Tarrant County College District had a director of diversity and inclusion job description, which this includes oversight over disability issues. And they needed to meet physical demands, including the need to sit, to use hands to finger, handle, or feel objects, tools, or controls, reach with hands and arms, and talk or hear. They're required to occasionally stand to walk, climb, or balance, frequently lift and move up to 10 pounds. And they need to have close vision, distance vision, color vision, peripheral vision, depth perception, and the ability to adjust focus. This is for, again, a desk job where you're doing diversity and inclusion. So that ended up being, I believe that ended up being addressed because it was discriminatory. But we see things like this all the time with how people write their job descriptions to say disabled people need not apply. So, workplace accommodations. An employee protected by the ADA must be able to perform the essential functions of a job with or without reasonable accommodation. The essential functions that the employee must perform. Does the position exist to perform that function? Can other employees perform that function, or can that work be distributed? What level of expertise is required to perform it? And a reasonable accommodation is any change or adjustment to a job or work environment that permits a qualified applicant or employee with a disability to apply to a job or perform that essential function of a job. They must provide reasonable accommodations unless they cause undue hardship. That is something that you can prove is unduly costly, extensive, substantial, or disruptive, or would fundamentally alter the nature or operation of this work. Neal, I'm going to just breeze through these because I want to be able to get to the field organizing section.
Right.
If that's okay.
No,
So
come
I just talked about many organizations slip in vague physical and mental requirements to discriminate against disabled applicants and weed them out. But you should know that the employee accommodation process is interactive. It's not something where you just get to reject accommodations and just go on your merry way. An employee or applicant requests an accommodation. The employer has to gather information necessary to process the request and explore the accommodation options. The employee can suggest accommodations. They can consult with resources like the Job Accommodation Network. And then they need to choose an accommodation and consider the employee's preference and then implement and monitor it. You can't just refuse to accommodate someone. You have to work with the employee to identify any reasonable accommodation that may work. So for more information on accommodations, I would recommend the Job Accommodation Network, askjan.org. It provides free and confidential consultation for employers of all sizes. It also provides consultation for employees and job seekers. Um, it has a free and comprehensive workplace accommodation toolkit. And this is something old, and you'll see an asterisk there. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, used to be a good resource on it before they were taken over by the current administration, which is now focusing on discrimination against white men. So I don't know how great they are of a resource now, but the Job Accommodation Network is still good. Okay, accessible field operations.
Yes. So respect self-identification of disability. People may or may not feel comfortable with disclosing a disability. That's just a reality. Do not assume that someone has or does not have a disability. Share accommodations and information ahead of time. And an example of that would be this meeting will have automatic closed captions. Ask anyone if they need if they need accommodations to participate in a meeting or call, not just people who identify as disabled. An example related to Disability Victory is when y'all got our email about this training or trainings you've attended of ours in the past, we've indicated if you have a accommodation need or request, please send an email to hello@disabilityvictory.org. If someone identifies as having a disability, ask how you can support them and what they need. Disabled people are not the most are the most knowledgeable about their own needs and experiences.
Yes. So, whenever it comes to making field organizing more accessible, it's certainly something that I, there's no rule book on how to do that. It's really something that we have just learned over the years from disabled organizers and from our own experiences on what can be done to make these operations more accessible. So take accessibility and disability into consideration when cutting turf. Um, are there more accessible communities to assign to disabled door knockers? So if you have canvassers who have specific mobility disabilities, are there ones that have more level neighborhoods? Or conversely, is it something where the neighborhood has a gravel path and no sidewalks, things like that, where it would be a really big challenge? So have as much as possible, if you can have some knowledge of where you're sending folks, then that can be helpful in planning and being able to distribute those assignments. Understand that disabled door knockers may need more time due to encountering access barriers. This also comes back to the question of, what we demand of or what we expect of people who work on campaigns. Sometimes it's glorified how many doors people can knock and how long they're able to do it. But whenever you're dealing with physical access barriers, or you have a condition that where you need to be able to take breaks and take a rest, it's something where you're going to need more time to be able to do that. If assigning to less accessible neighborhoods, you can pair voters or canvassers with disabilities with volunteers who do not have physical disabilities. This is something that we've heard about a lot in practice, where a volunteer without a mobility disability can go up to the door to knock and invite a voter out. So that's something that we have seen also with candidates with disabilities, where a candidate wants to go canvass and they will work with a volunteer who doesn't have a physical disability so they can go up to the door and invite the voter out to speak with them.
And there's also, as we're extending to talk about making field more accessible, a number of campaign tech tools now have capability where you can do virtual canvassing, where if you have a list of potential uh, supporters of a campaign, you can actually virtually knock on their doors and not physically have to be, not physically have to knock on their doors. So those tools exist. There are several platforms that provide this, but uh, in addition to that, factor in time for breaks and weather safety. Some disabilities and medication can cause heat sensitivity, and obviously always provide water. When possible, arrange transportation for volunteers. And then lastly, keep in mind more accessible alternatives, community events, and phone banking.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it might just be something where um, there is another job on the campaign that is going to be more accessible. And then sometimes it's something where you can really accommodate. It really comes down to, again, what the volunteer or the staffer is comfortable with, what their needs are. Um, it might be something easier to send someone to a community tabling event where they aren't going to encounter barriers versus sending to a neighborhood where there are a lot of accessibility challenges. Um, yeah. So, interacting with disabled supporters and voters, it's also important to have some disability etiquette. And again, this might be familiar to some folks, but best practices for campaigns whenever it comes to interacting with voters. Don't assume a person can't vote because they have a disability. This should be an obvious one, but we've again seen a rise in rhetoric surrounding um, who isn't allowed to vote or who should and should not be allowed to vote. And we've seen this on the left and the right, unfortunately. And it actually, I find it so frustrating because I really feel like it also goes back to literacy tests and like the documented history of voter suppression in this country, where we're talking about who is knowledgeable enough and qualified enough to vote. Um, Whenever interacting with voters who are deaf or hard of hearing, if you don't use American Sign Language, or maybe they don't use American Sign Language, there are multiple ways that you can communicate with them. You can use texting or writing in your phone to communicate. You can use a pen and paper, lip reading if they're comfortable. But please don't raise your voice at someone who is deaf or hard of hearing unless they would specifically ask that. But as a practice, it's not something that you should do. Um, if possible, have alternative formats of campaign literature, such as websites that have information on voting, accessible sample ballots, if there's online sample ballots, whatever you're within reason of what you're allowed to provide on a campaign. But having accessible campaign literature, mainly in terms of electronic documents, can be very helpful. Prepare canvassers with information about local resources for voters with disabilities whenever they're working their GOTV. Find out if there are accessible rides to the polls in your area. Make sure that they're aware of absentee voting information and any sort of requirements around absentee voting. And importantly, right now, when we are going through this period of change, is make sure people have the most accurate information on voting and what those requirements are. And if a voter has an interpreter, if you're at like a campaign event and there's an ASL interpreter, speak directly to the voter, not to the interpreter. And then finally, never distract or pet someone's service dog, especially not without asking, but just ignore service dogs is a good rule. And then finding disability organizations in your area to connect with. I mentioned Rev Up voting chapters, which are nonpartisan state disability voting coalitions. Protection and advocacy agencies. Most of these are state-run organizations, or they're not state-run organizations. They're run in every state, and they usually have a disability voting hotline for election day, where you can call and report issues, or in some cases, they're able to help with issues, whether that is connecting you with resources or following up on complaints of inaccessibility at the polls. our partners at New Disabled South, they have disability justice coalitions in 14 southern states working on a variety of issues important to disabled people. And then Centers for Independent Living are non-residential resource centers that support people with disabilities. They can provide, some of them do voting campaigns or provide voting information. And then finally, many state and national parties have local, state, and national disability councils and caucuses. So you can check with your political party to see if that's something that they have. So we have about 7 minutes left, and we do have to cut off right at 3 p.m. For our interpreters. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat or raise your hand.
And also, that QR code will take you to, for clarification purposes, the QR code that is on the screen will take you to our mailing list sign up. That is not to submit questions.
Yes. And again, this might be, something that is something that you're familiar with if you are part of the disability community. A lot of this stuff is something that you've experienced. I think everyone I know has experienced some sort of ableism or discrimination in the campaign space. But it's something where we're hoping to get this information out through the recording as well to organizations and campaigns that need to, frankly, not suck so much at accessibility and disability. So we're hoping to do additional trainings in the future around communications and what can be done there, as well as in-person, virtual, and hybrid events. And just we will be including in those event discussions talking about COVID safety, because that is something that is still very important to our community. Not just in terms of COVID now, but we have so many other diseases on the rise.
Yeah.
Thanks to making America healthy again. Hey, I am not seeing any questions.
And if folks would feel more comfortable to email us after, you can still email hello@disabilityvictory.org. We do have questions.
Yes, here.
So I'm just going to start by saying your chat is disabled. So if people are trying to post questions, they may not be able to access the chat. And also, some of us can't access the hand raise feature or use the email because that requires, like, some of us use voice type. So basically, I'm saying the options that are provided today are not necessarily accessible to everyone. So it took me several minutes to be able to find the raise hand feature and hurt myself in the process to use it. So I'm just, please provide verbal options as well in the future. Or one option can be to let people unmute as a way to indicate that they want to speak and then wait to be called on.
Okay.
But yeah, the chat currently is not working, just FYI.
Oh, that's what we had it set to host and co-host, but I just changed it to meeting group chat and anyone directly. My apologies for that.
But I guess my question is, do you, I know this particular presentation is directed towards organizations to making stuff accessible. Are y'all aware of any organizations that already are somewhat more accessible, and specifically have been having a hard time finding organizations that are campaigning about disability issues that are accessible to disabled folks and allow volunteers? Because a lot of what I'm seeing is places that have professional staff and don't really have room for volunteers, especially if you only have spoons to contribute like maybe an hour or two a month. So I don't know if y'all can share any info about that. Thank you.
Yeah. Are you thinking like campaign organizations or like
Policy or, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking more like policies, like maybe there's specific, let's say, Medicare reform that's related to for disabled people, or Medicaid, or like any sort of more healthcare policy related. But right now, I'm just kind of more looking to just generally get involved. But I'm curious if
Yeah.
anything like that exists, because the closest thing to me was the ACLU. They have a disability law sort of group, but they require you to volunteer 15 hours per month or something, which is not possible for me. But yeah.
Yeah. So one that comes to mind is caring across generations.
I was going to suggest that,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I know they have disabled staffers, so they would be one to reach out to. Little Lobbyist, although that probably the Little Lobbyist is focused on, they do focus on Medicaid, but they are mostly focused on children with medical conditions, so may not be the most relevant there. Um, and I think New Disabled South, but again, that's very state specific. That is in 14 southern states. So um, I know of individual organizations, but we don't have like overall that many national organizations, and that's been one of the challenges. Like I know Count Us in Indiana is a good one, and that's
Hmm.
run by someone from our community, but we don't have like the national infrastructure, and that's one of the challenges right now is getting these organizations to become more accessible. Okay, yeah, I see from AJ in the chat, New Disabled South doesn't have very many volunteer opportunities at this time. So I would check with Caring Across Generations. And we are at 2:59.
And I
Um,
do see that Rosalie has her hand up.
Rosalie, yes.
Rosalie, if you can keep it brief, because we only have our interpreters for less than 30 seconds.
Oh, oh,
Did we lose her?
Okay, real quick, because I couldn't unmute, is just I wanted to tell you that when you were talking about not having interpreters, I had a young woman that I registered to vote, and she was deaf, and also she did not. Spanish was her primary language, so when she went to vote, she pointed. They had signs. They had written signs, Republican or Democrat, because it was a joint. And she primary. She wanted to vote Democrat, and they gave her a Republican ballot, and she didn't realize. And after she voted, she went back and she told them that the candidates she wanted to vote for weren't on her ballot, but she had already pressed the lever on the electronic machine. And so then I went back with her, and they said there was nothing they could do. So we have to be very careful to help people, advocate for people who are deaf. Thank you. And especially who speak a second language.
yes, thank you. Thank you for that. So thank you everyone for attending today. Also, thank you, Zara, for the feedback regarding accessibility. Again, my apologies on the settings, so we'll fix that for the next training. And we will be uploading this to YouTube after we get it completely captioned, so it'll be a couple days. And yeah, thank you all for attending.